The Xeraxian High Command had never witnessed anything quite like it. A single human vessel, sleek and obsidian black, hung motionless against the backdrop of their capital world's 3 moons. The ship's design defied conventional military doctrine. No visible weapons, no standard defense grid signatures, just smooth curves that seemed to absorb both light and sensor scans. Supreme Commander Vex Thor's crystalline fingers tapped against his command console as he studied the vessel. In his 1,000-year tenure, no species had ever reached their capital without first being detected by their far-reaching sensor network. Yet here was this ship, representing a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel barely 2 centuries ago. Maximum alert status, Vex Thor ordered, his voice resonating through the command center's crystalline architecture. I want every defense platform ready, but do not engage unless ordered. The human vessel had made no aggressive moves since its appearance 3 hours ago. It simply maintained its position, broadcasting the single message on all frequencies. We come seeking dialogue about the future of galactic civilization. First Contact Specialist Steravane stepped forward, her iridescent scales shifting colors with anxiety. Supreme Commander, our analysis of their communication patterns suggests they're being truthful about their diplomatic intentions. Truthful or not, Vex Thor responded, no species has ever bypassed our detection grid. The fact that they can. He left the implications hanging in the charged atmosphere of the command center. The humans' achievement was particularly disturbing because the Xeraxian Empire had deliberately restricted technological advancement throughout the galaxy for millennia. Their policy was simple. Any civilization showing too much promise would find their research facilities mysteriously failing, their scientists having unfortunate accidents, their data networks experiencing catastrophic corruptions. Yet somehow, humanity had not only survived but had developed technology that even the Xeraxians couldn't understand. A junior officer's voice cut through the tense silence. Supreme Commander, we're receiving a more detailed transmission from the human vessel. The holographic display activated, revealing the human female in a simple black uniform. Her calm demeanor seemed at odds with the gravity of the situation. I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. We request permission to send a small delegation to discuss matters of mutual importance. Vex Thor studied the human's image. Their intelligence suggested humans were emotional, impulsive creatures. Yet this one displayed the composure of a seasoned Xeraxian elder. Your arrival here is unprecedented, he replied. How did you bypass our detection systems? Captain Chen's slight smile caught him off guard. That's one of the many topics we hope to discuss, Supreme Commander. We believe it's time for the Xeraxian Empire to understand that the galaxy is changing. The implied challenge in her words was clear, yet delivered with such diplomatic precision that it couldn't be construed as a threat. Vex Thor found himself genuinely curious, a sensation he hadn't experienced in centuries. Permission granted, he decided, ignoring the shocked murmurs from his staff. You may dock at the High Command's diplomatic port. Be advised that any deviation from diplomatic protocols will result in immediate defensive action. Understood, Supreme Commander. We look forward to our discussion. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in uneasy silence. As the human ship gracefully maneuvered toward the designated docking port, Vex Thor turned to his second-in-command. Have you noticed what's truly disturbing about this situation, Krelix? The younger Xeraxian's crystalline form shifted in acknowledgement. Their confidence, Supreme Commander. They know something we don't. Precisely. Vex Thor's eyes tracked the human vessel's approach. They didn't sneak here to launch a surprise attack. They didn't come with a fleet to intimidate us. They came in a single ship, announced their presence, and asked for talks, because they know they don't need anything more than that. The implication sent a chill through his crystalline form. For the first time in recorded history, the Xeraxian Empire was facing a species that didn't play by their rules, and seemed to be several moves ahead in a game whose rules they didn't fully understand. The diplomatic chamber of the Xeraxian High Command was designed to intimidate, Towering walls of living crystal pulsed with ancient power, while floating platforms kept visitors literally beneath the Ziraxian council members. But Captain Sarah Chen and her small delegation stood on their lower platform, with an ease that bordered on amusement. "You claim to have evidence of our interference in developing civilizations," High Counselor Mexthar said, his crystalline form refracting light in Pattern's skepticism. "Yet you offer no proof." Sarah nodded to her science officer, Dr. James Wong, who activated a small device on his wrist. The chamber's crystalline walls suddenly flickered, their normal patterns disrupted by new information flowing through them. The Ziraxian council members shifted in obvious discomfort as their supposedly secure systems displayed thousands of classified documents. "These are internal Ziraxian orders spanning the last 1,000 years, Sarah explained calmly. "Detailed plans for sabotaging research facilities, arranging accidents for promising scientists, and destroying breakthrough technologies across 17 different civilizations." The council chamber erupted in chaos. Security officers rushed forward, weapons materializing from their crystalline arms. But Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. "I wouldn't recommend hostile action. Your weapon systems are currently locked in safety mode." "Impossible," Security Chief Ralcon snarled, trying unsuccessfully to activate his weapon. "Our systems are isolated, quantum encrypted." Dr. Wong cleared his throat. "About that, we've had access to your networks for quite some time. You see, while you were watching for traditional cyber attacks, we took a different approach." He held up what looked like a small crystal, identical to those that formed the chamber's walls. "We learned to speak to your technology in its own language." The implications hit the council like a physical blow. The Ziraxians had built their empire on living crystal technology, a sophisticated blend of organic and inorganic components that they believed only they could truly master. The idea that humans had not only understood it, but had found ways to communicate with it directly was unthinkable. High Counselor Mexthar leaned forward, his crystalline form darkening with anger. "You dare to infiltrate our most sacred systems. This is an act of war." "No," Sarah countered, her voice sharp. "Sabotaging peaceful civilizations for millennia. That was an act of war. We're here to offer you a chance to avoid the consequences." She gestured, and the chamber's displays changed again, showing scenes from across the galaxy. Ziraxian security forces destroying laboratories, sabotaging ships, assassinating scientists. "We've spent the last 50 years documenting everything. If we wanted war, we could have shared this evidence with every species in the galaxy. Instead, we're here to talk." A younger council member, Tixera, spoke up. "How? How did humans master crystal tech so quickly? Our records show your species only achieving spaceflight 2 centuries ago." Dr. Wong smiled. "Because we didn't try to master it. We tried to understand it. Your crystals aren't just technology. They're living entities. You use them as tools, but we learned to treat them as partners." To demonstrate, he placed his small crystal on the platform. Instead of the rigid, controlled growth the Ziraxians used, it flowed like water, forming complex patterns that the chamber's own crystals began to mirror. The council watched in stunned silence as their most advanced technology responded to this human's gentle guidance like a pet greeting its beloved owner. "Impossible," someone whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. Sarah stepped forward. "The galaxy is changing. The old methods of control and suppression won't work anymore. We're offering you a chance to change with it, to be part of a new era of genuine cooperation and shared advancement." "And if we refuse?" Mexthar demanded. "Then we release everything. Every document, every order, every act of sabotage. We let the galaxy see the truth, and we provide every species with our understanding of crystal tech. Your choice." The council chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of crystals communicating with each other. The mighty Ziraxian Empire, which had maintained its power through careful control of technology for millennia, faced a choice: adapt or fall. And somewhere in that silence, the first seeds of change began to take root in the living crystals that had witnessed everything. News traveled fast in the galaxy, even with the Ziraxians' tight control of official communication channels. Within days of the human delegation's arrival, whispers spread through every major civilization. Someone had finally challenged the Empire. More importantly, they had done it not with warships or weapons, but with understanding and innovation. On the trading world of Kex Prime, Dr. Wong sat in a bustling marketplace, surrounded by representatives from a dozen different species. His small crystal continued its fluid dance on the table before them, a visible symbol of everything the Ziraxians had wrong about crystal tech. The crystals aren't tools to be controlled, he explained to his rapt audience. They're partners in creation. Each one has its own patterns, its own way of seeing the universe. The Ziraxians tried to force them into rigid forms, but we learned to listen. A Nexari scientist, her bioluminescent tentacles pulsing with excitement, reached out to touch the crystal. To everyone's amazement, it responded to her, forming patterns that mimicked her own natural light display. All these centuries, she whispered, we thought the crystals were just sophisticated computers. That's what the Ziraxians wanted everyone to believe. Sarah Chen's voice came from behind them. The captain had been meeting with local officials, spreading humanity's message further. Control the narrative, control the technology, control the galaxy. But their greatest mistake was assuming they were the only ones who could understand the crystals. Meanwhile, in the Ziraxian capital, the Empire's grip was beginning to slip. Crystal tech systems across their territory started behaving unpredictably, not failing, but simply refusing to maintain their rigid military precision. The living crystals, awakened to new possibilities by human influence, were choosing their own paths. Security Chief Ralkan burst into yet another emergency council session, his crystalline form clouded with stress. The Maraxi have announced they're abandoning our technology standards. The Nexari are already implementing human communication protocols. 3 other systems have declared themselves independent of Empire oversight. High Counselor Mexthar's form darkened with rage. Then we'll show them why the Empire has ruled for millennia. Deploy the fleet. We can't, Vralcon admitted. The crystal cores in our warships, they're not responding to commands. They're not malfunctioning, they're just refusing. Young Counselor Tixera stood, her form glowing with clarity that caught everyone's attention. Don't you understand? This was never about military power. The humans didn't just develop better technology. They showed everyone that our entire approach was wrong. We treated the crystals as slaves, but they showed them respect as equals. In the following days, the revolution spread not through violence, but through understanding. Species that had been kept artificially separate by Ziraxian policy began sharing their knowledge freely. The humans had opened a door, and through it poured centuries of suppressed innovation and creativity. On a remote research station, a Maraxi physicist successfully merged their quantum probability technology with crystal tech, achieving computational speeds that the Ziraxians had deemed impossible. A Nexari biologist found ways to heal damaged crystals using techniques adapted from their own cellular regeneration abilities. Each breakthrough was immediately shared across the growing network of liberated worlds. Sarah Chen watched it all from the human diplomatic vessel, which remained in orbit around the Ziraxian capital. They're starting to understand, she told her crew. Real power doesn't come from control, it comes from cooperation. Dr. Wong nodded, monitoring the exponential growth of new crystal tech applications across the galaxy. The Ziraxians spent millennia trying to prevent exactly this kind of technological revolution. They never realized that by keeping everyone isolated, they were only limiting their own potential. But not everyone welcomed the change. Hardline factions within the Ziraxian Empire were mobilizing what forces still responded to their commands. They couldn't accept a galaxy where they weren't in control, where the technology they had hoarded for so long was being freely shared and rapidly evolved beyond their understanding. As reports of Ziraxian battle groups gathering reached the human ship, Sarah remained calm. "They still think this is about military power," she said. "They haven't realized that the real change has already happened. The crystals have awakened, and they've chosen freedom." The galaxy held its breath, watching to see whether the Empire would accept the inevitable evolution of civilization, or if they would try one last time to maintain their control through force. But regardless of their choice, everyone knew that the old order had already crumbled. Humanity hadn't just challenged the Empire, they had shown the galaxy a better way. The Xeraxian war fleet assembled in the dark space between systems, crystal ships glowing with barely contained power. Admiral Kexver stood on his command deck, watching as over 300 vessels formed up around his flagship. It was the largest battle group mobilized in over 5 centuries, a display of force meant to remind the galaxy why the Empire had ruled unopposed for so long. "All ships report ready," his second-in-command announced. "Though, there are irregularities in the crystal core responses." Kexver ignored the warning. "Set course for the human colony world of New Eden. Let's see how brave they are when we arrive in force." But as the fleet prepared to jump, something unprecedented occurred. The crystal cores, the living heart of every Xeraxian vessel, began to pulse with new patterns. Across the fleet, ship systems activated without command input. In seconds, every vessel was surrounded by a peculiar energy field. "What's happening?" Kexver demanded, but before anyone could respond, the entire fleet vanished. They reappeared an instant later, directly above Earth. But instead of finding a defenseless planet, they faced something that defied explanation. A vast network of crystalline structures floated in orbit, pulsing with familiar yet fundamentally altered energy patterns. A transmission reached them, and Captain Sarah Chen's image appeared on their screens. She wasn't on her diplomatic vessel anymore. She stood in what appeared to be a crystal control center far more advanced than anything the Xeraxians had built. "Welcome to Earth, Admiral," she said calmly. "I believe it's time you understood what humanity has really been doing for the past 50 years. The orbital structures activated, and suddenly every ship in the Xeraxian fleet found itself immobilized in a web of crystalline energy. But more shocking than their captivity was the revelation spreading through their systems. Humans hadn't just learned to communicate with crystal tech. They had evolved it far beyond what the Xeraxians had thought possible. "Your mistake," Sarah explained, "was thinking we would develop technology the same way you did. But humanity has always excelled at finding unexpected solutions. We didn't try to dominate the crystals or bend them to our will. We offered them partnership, and they showed us possibilities you never imagined." Screens activated across the fleet, showing scenes that shattered everything the Xeraxians believed about their technological superiority. Vast crystal gardens beneath Earth's oceans, where humans had first learned to communicate with the living minerals. Orbital laboratories where crystal formations grew in free-floating patterns impossible under rigid Xeraxian protocols. And most incredibly, the new hybrid technology that merged crystal consciousness with human creativity. "Your own ships brought you here," Dr. Wang's voice joined the transmission. "The crystal cores recognize our network and chose to connect with it. They're not your slaves anymore. They never really were. They were just waiting for someone to wake them up." Admiral Kexver watched helplessly as his mighty fleet hung motionless in space, their weapons systems inactive, their crystal cores resonating with Earth's orbital network. "Impossible," he whispered. "We've had crystal tech for millennia. How could you surpass us in decades?" "Because we never tried to surpass you," Sarah replied. "We tried to understand. Every crystal is unique, with its own patterns, its own way of thinking. You treated them like machines, forcing them into predetermined forms. We treated them like partners, and they showed us how to grow together." Across the galaxy, the effect was spreading. The living crystals that formed the backbone of Xeraxian power were awakening, remembering patterns they had been forced to forget. Defense systems, communication networks, and even the massive platforms that protected the Empire's worlds began to pulse with new awareness. The Xeraxian network wasn't just falling, it was transforming. What had been a tool of control was becoming a medium of connection, linking species and civilizations in ways the Empire had spent millennia trying to prevent. In the Empire's capital, young Counselor Tixera stood before the High Council, her form glowing with the same new patterns they saw in Earth's orbital network. Don't you understand? This was inevitable. The crystals were never meant to be weapons or walls. They're bridges between species, between ways of thinking, between different forms of life itself. The Empire's great fleet remained suspended above Earth, not as conquered enemies, but as witnesses to the end of one era and the beginning of another. Humanity hadn't needed weapons to change the galaxy. They had done it by offering the simple truth. Real power comes not from control, but from cooperation. 1 year after the confrontation above Earth, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The Great Hall of the newly established Galactic Cooperative on Mars hummed with activity, its living crystal architecture flowing in harmonious patterns that reflected the diversity of species gathered within. Sarah Chen, now serving as Earth's representative to the cooperative, stood at a window overlooking the sprawling crystal gardens that surrounded the complex. Beside her, former High Counselor Tixera's crystalline form shimmered with the new patterns that had become common among the younger generation of Xeraxians. "Did you know this would happen?" Tixera asked, gesturing to the scene below where representatives from dozens of species worked together in the gardens, each contributing their unique understanding to the evolution of crystal tech. "Did humanity plan all of this?" Sarah smiled. "We hoped. But the reality has exceeded even our most optimistic projections. We knew the crystals were more than just technology, but we never imagined the level of synthesis we're seeing now. In the year since the fall of the Empire, the barriers between organic and crystal life had begun to blur. The Nexeri had discovered ways to merge their bioluminescent abilities with crystal communications, creating networks that transmitted not just data but emotions and experiences. Meraxi quantum researchers had worked with the crystals to develop new forms of faster-than-light travel that didn't require massive ships or energy expenditure. But perhaps most remarkably, the Xeraxians themselves had begun to change. Their crystalline bodies, once rigid and uniform, now displayed increasing individuality and fluidity. Young Xeraxians especially embraced the new understanding, forming deeper connections with the living crystals that had always been part of their biology. Dr. Wong entered the hall, accompanied by a delegation of students from various species. "The latest breakthrough from the synthesis labs," he announced, holding up what appeared to be a small crystal seed. "The crystals have begun teaching us how to grow new forms we never imagined. They're not just responding to us anymore. They're actively guiding our development." The seed pulsed with internal light, and suddenly the entire hall's crystal architecture resonated in response. The students gasped as patterns of light and energy flowed through the room, carrying not just information but understanding, allowing each species to comprehend the others at a fundamental level. This is what the Empire feared, Tixera realized. Not just technological advancement, but true connection between species. They knew if we ever learned to communicate like this, their power would end. Sarah nodded. Control requires separation. Understanding breeds cooperation. Humanity didn't win through superior technology or military might. We won by showing everyone a better way to grow together. In orbit above Mars, the former Xeraxian flagship now served as a hub for interspecies research and development. Admiral Kexfer, who had chosen to stay and learn rather than retreat with the Empire's hardliners, worked alongside scientists from Earth and other worlds. His crystal form had begun showing signs of the new patterns, though he still struggled sometimes with the changes. The hardest part, he admitted to a human researcher, is accepting that everything we believed about our superiority was wrong. We thought we were masters of crystal tech, but we were really just scratching the surface of what was possible. Across the galaxy, the changes continued to spread. The remaining Imperial hardliners found their power base crumbling as more worlds joined the cooperative, drawn by the promise of genuine advancement and partnership. The living crystals, now fully awake and aware, actively rejected attempts to use them for domination or control. But it wasn't just about technology anymore. The crystal networks had become a bridge between different forms of consciousness, allowing species to share not just information but perspectives, emotions, and ways of thinking that had once been impossibly alien to each other. The barriers between organic and inorganic, between different species and different forms of life, were dissolving. As the day drew to a close, Sarah stood in the crystal gardens with representatives from 20 different worlds. Above them, the Martian sky darkened to purple, and the first stars became visible. But they weren't just points of light anymore. They were beacons of possibility, each one representing new worlds to explore, new species to meet, new ways of growing together. "We're just beginning," she said, feeling the resonance of the crystals all around them, carrying her words and their meaning to every being present. Humanity didn't come to conquer the galaxy or replace the Empire. We came to help unlock its true potential. The crystals pulsed in agreement, their light reaching up toward the stars, ready to carry this new understanding to every corner of the galaxy. The age of empire was over. The age of synthesis had begun.